It was another world. He's great. We were all immigrants. Go for the house and get the salad days.
Yes.
He did his lines. Good, so.
Good evening. I'm Ann Eichinger, pastor here at Central Presbyterian, and we are glad you are here with us. It is always an honor for us to have King Institute here for a lecture series. As Martin was saying, they sort of signed us up for a whole bunch of them this year. And so I'm like, I don't even ask session for permission anymore. I just say, King's coming. So it just happens. We are glad you're here. Informationally, the restrooms are down this hall to your left. To your left. The first door on your left is men's. The second one is women's. We are asking people to wear masks simply because it is our policy. So if you're speaking, you do not have to wear a mask. But if you are sitting in the space, and we are glad you are here. So, Martin.
My name is Martin Garwick, and I direct the King Institute for Faith and Culture at King University here in Bristol, which is a delight to me, and it's a delight to have you out tonight. Thank you for coming and joining us for this presentation. And it's a delight to welcome Bill Turner back. He was here in 2015, and I'm convinced he was here before that too, but I can't find the records of it, so I'm going to dig it out. But it's good to have him back in town, and good to have you with us as well. My predecessor at King was a man called Tom Peake. And Tom set a pattern at King for a lot of interest and consideration in civil rights, as he spent many research trips going to Atlanta to write a history of the SCLC, which is still in print. You can find it on Amazon. So it's a good tradition to continue that we have here, and it does coincide with Black History Month. And Bill will tell you about his duties during that month, I'm sure, in a moment. I do want to tell you a little bit about our other programming and also about the book table. The book table doesn't have any actual books on it. We ordered the books on January the 3rd and they have not arrived. So you do, however, have the exciting opportunity to order one that will be signed and sent to you. And if you go to the table at the back, you'll see a QR code on a big piece of paper. And just use your phone and take a picture of that and it'll take you to the link and you can get a copy of the Harlan Renaissance. At least one of you showed up with a copy with you, which is also good. If you want to see a copy of it, you can ask Benson to show you his copy of it later on. Also, in the world of the QR code, be sure you get one of these if you don't have one. This is our, we didn't do a brochure this year because we knew that COVID was going to change things up, and it has quite a bit. But this will give you access to all our activities at the King Institute. If you use the QR code at the bottom, on the bookmark, you can find the programming we have up. Briefly, I'll tell you what's coming up. We have on February 28th, bluegrass artist Becky Buller, who's won all kinds of International Bluegrass Music Association awards, will be at King in the morning, and she'll be at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum in the evening. And she's a fantastic singer and fiddler and songwriter, and I encourage you to come to that. In March, one of the things we had to postpone, or cancel rather, was a member of the United States Holocaust Museum's Survivor Speaker Bureau. They're not letting those folks travel yet with concerns about health. And so we found a replacement. From Milligan College, just down the road, Kelly Brown, who is professor of music, has done a book about music and the Holocaust. And so she's going to come speak to us on March 21st. In April, well, at the end of March, on March the 26th, and again the following, no, I don't remember the dates, I go 2 consecutive Wednesdays to Dallas, which is one of the strangest things I will ever have done in my life. To fly to Dallas 2 consecutive Wednesdays. Then I come back and we have a flurry of activity unknown before in the King Institute, because we have 3 events in a week.
Wow.
This is because of some rescheduling. So on February, I don't even know the month anymore. I'm already losing my mind, and we're not even to April. Not that this will surprise many of you. April the 3rd and 4th, one of my colleagues, Bill Linderman, who's a mathematician, is going to put on the other hat he wears, which is that of composer and pianist. Bill has spent sabbaticals at Cornell University and here studying composition, and he is a superb pianist. So his compositions for piano, flute, and cello and voice will be on display at King on Sunday the 3rd at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and again the following morning on the Monday morning. Then that Thursday, it's like we will have opened a copy of The Lord of the Rings and someone will have stepped out. And his name is Malcolm Guite. Malcolm is a poet and a priest and a musician, and he's just absolutely wonderful, and you need to come see him. He is just a captivating presence. We have him on a Thursday night, which is a little unusual for us, I believe, at Emmanuel Episcopal Church, and then again on Friday morning at King. And the experience of Malcolm really is one not to be missed. Finally, we end the year with our annual Buechner Lecture. We used to be called the Buechner Institute for Faith and Culture for American novelist and memoirist Frederick Buechner. And to honor his work and legacy this year, we bring a man called Jeff Monroe, who just did a book called Reading Buechner. So he'll be on April the 11th. So we have a lot of things coming up, and I love seeing you here tonight. I'd love to see you come back again. We have a lot of good, exciting things going on, and we're glad to have you with us. At the end tonight, we probably will have time for some questions, if that's all right with you. Is that okay? Okay. That was a pause that I regard as, it was clearly a bit of negotiation, but I wasn't sure what to do with that. So to introduce our speaker tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Adam Dixon.
Good evening to everybody. Good evening. Glad to see you this evening. My name is Adam Dixon, and I guess for this evening, I'll wear the hat of a supporter of Dr. Bill Turner, and really do appreciate him and his example. But in my 9-to-5 life, I work for the Langston Center in the city of Johnson City, and I also serve on the board of Mayor and Alderman in the town of Jonesboro, and I also do a little teaching at ETSU. And it's a sign that I have no life, because I spend all my time in those activities. But it gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce to you a gentleman that, in my assessment, either has been instrumental or essential in the development of the African American experience in this region, making sure that it is known, bringing it to the forefront, cultivating one's knowledge of it. I could go into, I guess, lengthy expose of his bio and his academic accomplishments and his work, but I want to believe that you read that and come in here this evening. What I would like to share with you is that here probably, I'd say maybe the past 10 to 15 years, there has been a resurgence of understanding about the black experience in Appalachia. There's some young people down in Knoxville. You may have watched on public TV, William Isom and Dr. Nkechi, and a few other people that have started an effort called Black in Appalachia, and it's on public TV. There's a young man in Pennington Gap, Virginia, by the name of Micaiah Davis, who has a project called the STAY Project. And the whole idea is young people staying in Appalachia, in particular young African Americans, born and raised here. How do we keep them here? Even just recently, a gentleman by the name of Jim King and a group called FAHE, the Federated Association of Housing Enterprises, reached out to a collective of black leaders to talk about how do we address poverty and education and whatnot. And in each of those instances, Bill Turner has either been essential or integral in those efforts. People look to Dr. Turner, and there's really no way that you can talk about the black experience in Appalachia without looking to that book that deals with blacks in Appalachia, written in the late 1980s. So I would like to refer to Dr. Turner as the dean of this area, this genre, this particular niche, if you will. And I personally, before I leave this earth, and I know one day I will leave, I hope I'm trying to prepare to go to the right place, but I know one day I'm going to leave. And so I, for one, want to see, when we think about Appalachian studies, the black experience, the African American experience, to be a subset of that study. And to me, the dean of that particular area is the gentleman that's going to speak to you this evening, Dr. William Turner.
He must have turned it off. He must have turned it off. So far.
Assalamu alaikum.
You're on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in a Christian church. Konnichiwa. Bonjour. Buenos dias. Howseat. That's Zulu from South Africa. I tried that this morning. I would just say if we were in my hometown, I was born not too far from here, in a place called Harlan County, Kentucky. And we just usually say, how y'all doing this evening? I'm glad to see y'all. Thanks for coming out. Now, I must say something out of that I hope, as Joel Osteen says, I like to start with something funny. You mentioned going to heaven. There's a story about a man who died and he went to heaven, and whomever was like the host that shows new arrivals around was showing this fellow around, and he noticed over in a far corner were a lot of people that were literally in heaven behind bars. And he said, who are those people over there, and why are they behind bars like that? Why are they cordoned off that way? And he said something to this effect. He said, they're all from East Tennessee, and we have to lock them up because they want to go home every weekend. The mountains are so beautiful. In fact, once God was spotted on Roan Mountain out here in East Tennessee, and somebody said, God, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm working at home today. See, I'm from the mountains too. So thank y'all very much. I'm happy to be here. I must thank you, sir, for that most generous introduction. It reminds me of another story. See, I like to tell stories. A man died once, young lady, okay, and he was lying in the cage like that table there. And all the nice people in town were there because this was a bad brother. Everybody knew him. He was a Mason. He was an elk. And the man who was eulogizing, much like you eulogized me, the man who eulogized him was extolling this man's personal moral character. He quoted several times from the Book of Solomon, and he quoted from that part that says, he cleaves unto no other, and he loves his wife. And the deceased is a Mason and an elk, and he's a Boy Scout master, and this man gives money every week. He tithes twice at Presbyterian Church, and on and on and on, and just said nice things about him, as you did me, and I really thank you. And when he finished with this 5-minute exhortation, the widow, sitting like you two are, she nudged her daughter after listening to this characterization of her late husband, and she said, go up there and make sure there's your dad in that case. That's the way my wife would be saying. I've been married 53 years my wife would probably say, Bill is a jerk. Now, let me get started. Thank y'all for inviting me. Martin, appreciate it. You see the title of my presentation. Let's see how we can do this. With a word of caution, I shall start. Because this morning I told a story about every time you go down Route 58 between here and Pennington Gap, or you take 23 up to Gates City, or you go, sir?
We need the mic on.
Oh, Lord, I didn't know.
It's on whatever the board thing
Flip the button.
It's on one of these things here?
is. Yeah.
Did that make it work?
Yes, sir.
It's working now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, man.
There.
This Watch the Falling Rocks, the legend has it that there was a Cherokee Indian in Bryson City, North Carolina in the 1500s. And he went out hunting for deer one day, and he smoked some rabbit tobacco. You ever smoked rabbit tobacco? Sir? Yes, you have. You know you smoked some rabbit tobacco. You young people, they'll tell you all what rabbit tobacco is. So this guy named Falling Rock got disoriented, and he didn't come back to the village. They never saw him again. So within every distant place from where he left from Bryson City, all the way up to Grundy, Virginia, they put out signs on the road that said, "Watch for falling rocks." Everybody's looking for this guy because they don't know where he is. I use that metaphor to say, I'm going to say some things quite purposely and deliberately that will be like rocks falling on your head, depending on your perspective. I may even say something about your favorite politicians. I might commit the sin of commenting on something my grandfather said to me one time about Christianity. My grandfather, the only time I saw my granddaddy, we called him Shoot Daddy. The only time I saw my granddaddy in a church was at his funeral, and he lived to be 91. And I asked him, when I was about 12 years old, in 1958, I asked my granddad, I said, "Pop, why don't you go to church? Grandma is the mother of the church. My mama played the church piano for 47 years, and you won't go to church." And Pop was saying, he told me how he saw a mate of his hanged in Georgia in 1906. He was 11 years old. And he said, and when they got through pulling those pointed caps off, one of them was the deacon at the biggest church in Columbus, Georgia. Because me and my uncle used to cut his grass. And he said, I reckon the rest of them was the other deacons at that church. And the final thing my grandfather said, watch the falling rocks. He said, I sure am glad that all the slave masters are Christians. Can you reckon what they might have did to us if they hadn't been Christians? Lord have mercy, Jesus. So I'm going to say some things like that, not for shock value, but just for truth value. This area here where we're standing, where I have Bristol, Virginia down at the bottom there, you know, it's below the dotted circle, that's a part of the world I call West Kentucky. I was born and raised in West Kentucky. Anybody else born and raised in Southwest Virginia? Anywhere between Whitfield down to Lee County and Pennington Gap. Marion, Preston, how are you again? Then there's what I call West Kentucky, which means what? West Virginia. I'm not going all the way up to Huntington and Charleston up that way. I'm in what you call Southern West Virginia. We're going to be in Keystone and Bluefield and Beckley and the Pocahontas coal fields of Southern West Virginia. Gary and Welch, places like that. My neck of the woods is Kentucky. I was born in Harlan County, Kentucky, probably one of the most iconic, well-known coal camps in the whole wide world. I was born in the largest coal town in the United States of America, founded by United States Steel in 1917. My mother was born there in 1924. In fact, once I got older and realized what Harlan County meant, being from bloody Harlan County, I would have never chosen to be born in such a place. Once I went to college, I was like, oh my God. But I had to be born in Harlan County because you have to be where your mama is when you're born. Otherwise, I go say, Mama, how about you in Boston? Georgia, starting in 1977 or 78, I met this man on the left up there holding that book called Roots. And I spent many a night with Alex Haley learning things about how he wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X. And let me listen to notes what he was talking about. Things that have never been out to let me listen to him. One time I wrote this book. I helped to, in 1985, we did a book called Blacks in Appalachia. Even on Amazon, 35 years later, they say it's still groundbreaking work on, 1985. Alex looked at it. I was trying to get tenure when that book came out at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. When you're trying to get tenure, it's like trying to get your driver's license. You put your hands on 10 and 2, and you give a hand signal, you're getting a high school, 1965 grade. So Alex looked at my book, and he said, don't you ever write any more crap like this. Because I was writing for what was basically, and I don't use the word white as a verb, but I was writing it for elderly white gentlemen who were going to judge me to get tenure. So I wrote what they wanted to see. We had demographic charts, we had correlation analysis, we had the statistical science package, we had articles by Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson, and Alex said, write something your mama can read. Now, hopefully, if my mother was still here, that she would like what I tried to write, because I based it on a statement from Muriel Rukeyser that says, as Alex told me, books should be made up of stories. And you went into all this molecular level sociology. Nobody wants to hear that stuff. So I tried to write this book because I have some grandboys, and I don't want them to say, well, Papa, where are you from? Because a lot of parts of the country where I am from, where my daddy is from in Coburn, where my friends are from in Stoneacre, where people I know who lived in St. Paul, and in Dant, and Clinchco, and here's more pressing. Big stuff. A lot of these places are disappearing. The trees have come back over and there's nobody there. So I don't want them to say, whatever happened to the so-and-so people? And then I also wrote my book because I can demonstrate that there are some African-American people of superior talent and achievement who grew up in little poor coal camps like Grundy, Virginia, and along Toms Creek in Wise County. And I also wrote my book because I tell my children, I tell all children, if you get a superior education like I was lucky enough to get, you won't feel as bad when people discriminate against you because you can recognize ignorance much better. I'm psychologically quite comfortable when a service station attendant said to me, where are you preaching at today, buddy? It's nothing but a microaggressive insult. But because I understood he don't see too many brothers in a checkered jacket like this, I cut him some slack. He would never wear a coat like this way. You ain't from around here, are you? When people say that to you, because I got a superior education, when I get discriminated against, its effects are not as bad as they might otherwise be.
Amen.
So I tell black kids and white kids that from the mountains. This man, John Stevenson, on the top up there was my mentor when I was a college student. The guy at the bottom named Lowell Jones ran the Appalachian Center at Berea College for 40 years. And John, who sent me off to graduate school at the University of Notre Dame, he said to me, now Billy, he always called me Billy, him and my grandma. And he said, I think I'll hold this thing. He said, why don't you devote your life to the study of African Americans in Appalachia? That was in 1967. And I said, you must be out of your mind. Because all I knew is I recently read a book called Night Comes to the Cumberlands by Harry Carl, and another book called Another America by Michael Harrington. And in each instance, they describe whites in Appalachia as I have written on the right side of that screen. They describe them as being from a dysfunctional culture. They were banjo playing, coal mining, family feud, Scotch, Irish hillbillies who toted guns, were sometimes incestuous. They were just moonshining, semi-honorary, toothless, out of the Main Street people and they handled snakes, and they were Christian fundamentalist racists. I did not make that up. That is what they determined to be the lost tribes of white people in the mountains of the South. And they called them yesterday's people. Right? Come on now, some of y'all from Appalachia.
Amen.
In fact, I went so far to say one time, watch for falling rocks. I went so far to say one time, had there never been slavery in the United States, there had never been any people with whom you could compare and make inferior on the basis of their skin color, the white people in the mountains of the South would have been the black people. Hello, Dolly. Well, hello. You know what they did with Snuffy Smith? They make millions on it over there in Dollywood and in Pigeon Forge. They sell an Appalachian stereotype. Last year or so, this book came out called Hillbilly Elegy. J.D. Vance. His folks grew up in Breathitt County, Kentucky, next to Hazard. And Netflix gave him and Ron Howard from Opie fame $55 million to put together that movie that showed these people as though he should have said, because of the way America was set up, it should be impossible for white people to live like this. It's their fault. Just go look at what the book says. It doesn't talk about systemic problems in the economy of the mountain of the South. It says the people are dysfunctional. They like being lazy. You know the picture they have of Snuffy Smith and the one of Jethro and Ellie Mae. And they were ignorant and they didn't know what to do. And so now you have a whole white working class that lives outside of Appalachia. And that's the way they pushed that in 2016. And there came to be a point that J.D. Vance was writing lines for Donald Trump. Watch for falling rocks. Now J.D. Vance is running for senator from Ohio. Same guy. How did I get off on that? Usually wait till a little bit further down the road. So some of y'all know about the Beverly Hillbillies. Anybody see a 1972 award-winning film called Deliverance? The banjo duo, you remember that?
Hear the banjos.
That is what they were doing with stereotypes. So they had one out of Harlan County called Justified. And of course, the Dukes of Hazzard. You remember the stereotypes. Oh, that's some black Appalachians. What do I know about that? That's my father standing next to his paycheck on December 30th, 1946. I was 6 months old. Daddy brought home $47.50 after working 84 hours. Because of because of these numbers over here, what do you think those are?
The timers on the...
There was a certain Bristolian who sang a song that says, I was born one morning when the sun didn't shine. I picked up the shovel and I walked to the mine. I loaded 16 tons of number 9 coal and the sawball said, well, bless your soul. 16 tons, Tennessee Ernie Ford, right? Daddy did, I don't know how many tons, but he bought them $47.50. Not that anybody in this wonderful Presbyterian church drinks bourbon, but I paid $58 recently for a bottle of Basil Hayden because it was Christmas. That's a pretty good bourbon, ain't it, brother? All I'm saying is, can you imagine Daddy had 5 children and he bought them less than $50. And you notice that nice graphic I have, we were stair-step children. My sister Peggy is 7.10 months older than me. Mama had 5 children in 7.10 years. My daddy used to say, your mama has a baby about every 9 months and 45 minutes, buddy. Well, I know you're trying to hear me say this, but I asked my father when I was about 11, I said, Daddy, hey man, I just want to talk to you. Just tell me the truth. How did work mama have 5 children in 7 years like this? And he said, well, we live in this coal camp. And just like that train comes out into the Bristol Railroad Station, the train comes up to Holler every night, every morning, 5 o'clock. And he said, it makes so much racket, clinking and a clanging, it wakes you up. And it would be too early to get up, but it would be too late to go back to sleep. You know, I think that's very logical. After all, he married Mama when she was 15 in 1938. He was 22. If a 22-year-old person showed up at my house to date my daughter, I'd shot him. You're too old for my daughter. But it was not uncommon. Some of y'all got grandmas. It was not uncommon to be married at 16 in 1938. That was very common. So that's how us still. And then Mama brought in 5 more children. That was just the first 5. She had 3 more. And by the time our oldest sisters had left and moved to New Jersey, they divorced from their husbands, and each of them had a son that was less than 5. And Daddy said, no boy named Turner's going to grow up without a daddy. And when he got it. They called their mama Marie and Peggy. They called our mama Mama. Lots of black families were that way. Lots of white families in the mountain south that way. You raise these children, the children are not to blame for their parents' problems. And so Dad brought 2 boys in that were less than 5 when he was in his late 40s. One of the smartest men God ever put breath in was James Baldwin.
Yep.
I don't know what you say, at least for me. Please read some things about James Baldwin. And we're going to talk a lot here about words we're going to be using tonight. And James Baldwin thinks how words can mirror or reflect the world as it is, or the people can distort words, and that's what we've seen done a lot here lately. For example, when you see that picture there, this guy, this African-American muscular young man with a flag on his back, what might that symbolize? What might the picture of the white woman running some paint over Harriet Tubman and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King mean? It means they're whitewashing history. In fact, this very moment in the state of Tennessee, there was a man, I think I have a slide somewhere here, maybe it's next. No, I'm sorry. It ain't easy being Black History Month. Some of y'all remember Kermit the Frog, and you used to watch with your kids and say, it ain't easy being green. It ain't easy being Black History Month. Why? Because when you come out like I have tonight, and you talk about some things that I think I've already implied a little bit, is that slavery is at the center of everything that is American, and there are a lot of people who deny that fact. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it. But you do remember, at the ratification of the Constitution, the Founding Fathers decided that if you owned slaves, that person was equivalent to 3/5 of a white person, and therefore you had more power than people who had lesser power, which was quite convenient for the president-elect, George Washington, because he had 310 slaves at the time. 310! You see how quiet I got? People are breathing different. Here we go, y'all. Let's do a little Buddhist thing here. Just relax. It's okay. Oh, I'm sorry, but this man right here has started a crusade against something called critical race theory, which many Americans who voted for him don't have a clue what critical race theory has anything to do with, but they've been tricked with words, as I said a moment ago from James Baldwin. It's got a lot of people confused about what should we study. Where I live in Houston, Texas, the governor signed a bill that made it against the law to use any of 10 concepts. They actually are now trying in Texas to specify your syllabus, what you can and cannot talk about. Virginia too. You know that man right there?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes.
Mr. Harlan. I think he was teaching some white kids about white privilege, which means he couldn't have been Samuel Clemens. I think his name was Mark Twain. That's all Mark Twain wrote about. Him and old Jim.
Yep.
You see, so a lot of the classics will have to be taken off the shelf. They probably will ban my book in Tennessee because I talk about the N-word. How one time my granddaddy said, "Can I use the N-word for a moment?" Watch for falling rocks, young brother. You say something, like, oh, don't say that. But you know, that N-word didn't have a big problem with many of us when we were growing up, because my granddad would say, ah, you my nigga if you don't get no bigger. I said, what? Yeah, you heard that, brother. Yeah. That didn't mean a thing about it. It meant stay in the place. Do what I tell you. And I knew he only said it at certain times when I had done something that would look good to him and something that was commendable to his name, because y'all represent my name, boy. You better act like you got some sense. And so I heard all kinds of words, not to mention that my grandmama was a bootlegger. So you really would hear a lot of stuff at grandma. And y'all know any bootleggers? Oh, you know some bootleggers, Miss McCann? You mean the white bootleggers? Oh, Lord. James Baldwin again, critical race theory. This man here, Carter G. Woodson, came up with Black History Month. He called it Negro History Week in 1926. He was at Howard University, Carter G. Woodson. But I must hasten to mention, there's a man from this time, Charles Spurgeon Johnson, one of the most prolific sociologists and editors, born and raised in Lee Street Baptist Church in this town. And that man put together as much stuff as Carter G. Woodson did, because he was like the voice of the Harlan Renaissance. He was a bad brother. I'm going to quickly go through those 3 chapters of my book. One is called Black People Done Lost Their Stuff, which is my grandmother's way of telling me. I sat with my grandmother and I watched with my grandmother the confirmation hearings of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. I sat with my grandma. She was 94 at the time. Wow. And when she watched some of the things that they said, she looked at me and said, these Negroes done lost their mind. Because you do know some heinous things were said at that hearing. Y'all remember that? The Coca-Cola cans? Yep. Yeah. And there's a 90-year-old woman said, they're supposed to be the smart black people. They went to Harvard. They went to Yale. They done gone crazy. That's what she said. That's what she said. They done lost their minds. I can't imagine what she was saying, some of the things that have come about since then. I have a chapter in my book called On Trash Talking and Signifying. I bet you somebody sitting there right now could do a thing for the black community, Brother Allen, called the Signifying Monkey. Right. I'm watching you, brother. This brother right here with his gray hair, y'all, we gotta get him up here. He can just look at him and tell him, you know what I'm talking about, right? These things people do, shine, shine, say, told me. This black man on the Titanic. The ways that we taught these things is what I came to learn, which led me to a chapter called School Integration. The way they integrated and got rid of all the black schools was the worst thing that happened to black people since liquor. It eviscerated communities. The first people they got rid of was the black teachers. That's right. The most upstanding man in town was the principal of the colored school. And if they could do Mr. Coleman like that, what do you think they'd do to my dad? He's just a coal miner. So these only professionals we had that wore a shirt and a tie every day. And would say, you need to shine your shoes, boy. Those kind of teachers we had. What happens when you get rid of all of them is it ends up with something called academic achievement gaps between blacks and whites. So we're reaping what we sowed. We got rid of people that lived in the community on Mary Street. Is Mary Street still here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. A book there that explains it real well from everybody's college freshman studies is called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Yeah. Things fell apart in the Appalachian South that way. So that's why my grandma would say so many black people are lost, confused, unsure, unclear, perplexed, disoriented, bewildered, because they have gotten rid of certain attitudes and beliefs and customs and dances and jokes and information and moods and legends and opinions and prejudices and soft skills, superstitions, techniques, traditions, and value. That's all gone from many black communities. Wow. Wow. I don't even try to talk to some young people nowadays because they might say, you can't talk, you can't tell me that. Who you think you are? You ain't my dad. But see, that was a time everybody was your dad. Everybody kept up with you. You couldn't date nobody's sister with disrespect because he was dating your sister. We had this community, everybody knew who went with who. Hey, you were somebody else's boyfriend tonight, ain't you? Everybody knew these things about each other. And we got taught these things. That's my grandmama. She lived from 1895 to 1996. Her name is Minnie Lee Mabry Randolph. And I think about her, and I kind of cheer up sometimes, because Bill Withers, a coal miner's son from Slab Fork, West Virginia, outside Beckley, had a song called Grandma's Hands.
Yeah.
Clapped in church on Sunday morning. Grandma's hands played a tambourine so well. Grandma's hands used to issue out a warning, and she'd say, Billy, don't you go so fast. You know, when your grandma would take, boy, you better watch yourself. Don't you take no wooden nickels, you hear? Oh, ignorant lady that went to 3 grades of school, but she knew this stuff. She was a bootlegger. Used to carry a 38 snub nose in her apron. Granny didn't take no stuff from nobody. And she was the sweetest thing you knew. And I'm saying that some of these things, in terms of what we call black people stuff, this word stuff in the South, all of y'all are Southerners at some point or another. Now you know how much people say, what is that stuff? When the Don Drysdale, anybody remember that picture for the Brooklyn Dodgers? When he would lose a count on his slide, they said, well, he's lost his stuff. We were so in the world in Harlan County, Kentucky, we might look at a beautiful woman and say, boy, she sure can strut her stuff. Oh, I guess none of y'all. I know only heathen in here, right? Right? You know, the stuff. For example, my wife and I have this big bathroom, and one side of it is about 8 feet long, and then the L comes back this way. This is her side. This is my stuff. My stuff is about like that. Toothbrush, something. No. I can go on her side of the counter and get a Q-tip and forget to put the lid back on the Q-tip. 3 weeks later, she will say, Bill, you've been in my stuff in there. Right? People get the stuff beat out of them all the time. So stuff has a lot of meanings. Hey man, that's some good stuff. Buy some. I tell you, don't mess with that stuff. Somebody got the stuff beat out of them. So we're saying that stuff is a very abstract thing, but here's what it really is. We were talking recently at Berea College, and we said that college tries to give its students some very good Appalachian stuff. Alex Haley, his stuff was called Roots. Please read a book called The Souls of Black Folk by William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. The Souls of Black Folk, 1905. Kanye West needs to read The Souls of Black Folk. He probably wouldn't do some of the stuff he does if he knew some of this stuff that these people know for him. And in fact, I pulled out my wallet somewhere recently, and I put 5 black kids on the spot because I was a teacher for 45 years, and I like to put people on the spot like my teacher used to do me. And I said, I walked to this girl, I had some $100 bills, and I took, because I got them before, and I gave one $100 bill, another $100. I said, if any of you can sing the Negro National Anthem, just 2 bars, you can keep the $100. If you can't do it, give me $50. I got my $300 back before you could count to 3, because they don't know. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from a gloomy past, till now we stand at last where the white gleam about James Weldon Johnson. They don't teach it to kids anymore. It was full of values about self-determination, self-respect. Black people should not be ashamed of being African people. That's the way we look. We're just like, you might say, this symbol here. Everybody's seen that. So one side is white, one side is black. What did I do? If you go over here, these values here, these Appalachian values, you note that I put black in brackets because the white people of the mountains of the South have the same values. They're very religious. They're very family-oriented. They're patriotic too. Why do they think they call it a volunteer state? They believe in achievement in academics, but never get above your raising, right? Very patriotic, a sense of humor, a sense of humility. Where I grew up in Harlan County, if you didn't have a sense of humor and a sense of humility, they would run you crazy because they think you take yourself too seriously. Appalachian people tend to be quite humble about things. They're just humble to the core. That's just part of growing up. But all of that has changed. That lady there is my critical race theory thinker. She is what I would just call a typical black Appalachian grandma, a generic picture, but the lady lives in Beckley, West Virginia, and I call her the great Appalachian social influences. Anybody in here got any social influences, you young people? Of course, you do TikTok, right? Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. That's the grandmama nowadays. That's who people's grandma are, social media. They take all their attitudes, all their beliefs, all their thoughts, all their actions off a telephone. And look what it gets you. I'm going to put away from that picture real quick, especially this right here. Because they have normalized foolishness amongst a lot of young black people. They made foolishness into normalcy. Talk any way you want to, say anything you want to, do anything weird. Up at the top, when I was a young kid, at 25, I wasn't 25, up in here in 1968, I must have been 68, must have been 24 maybe. Young black people back then were plugged into something that you would pass them and say, hey brother, how you doing? Hey bro, what's going on, man? I remember I had an afro so big that the sun didn't even shine on my face. Because I still try to have one that's just too thin now. You know, that medicine my urologist gives me that took my afro away. Get 75 and you can't have hair. But back then, we had a flow like that lady right there, but we also were into something about unity in the community. I bet it had it in Bristol and Kingswood. I know they did, because I knew the Scat Cats. Do the Scat Cats still play around somewhere? Oh, back here, that's my grandmother again. To be or not to be. Some Shakespeare. Grandma would say, be honest, be thoughtful, be responsible, be respectful, and be thankful to God. She was a bootlegger, but she read the Bible. So I'm ending up here by saying this stuff that we've seen, we're at a place now where the people are influencing and informing and inspiring and influencing and motivating our children. The question must be asked, everybody know what this is right here? This is a bat. This is some poo. Because I don't want to use the word my grandmother used to use. When she would say, now he's bat crazy. Did you hear that where y'all came from? Okay. So what do you think happens to a young mind, a young person's mind, when their brain and their thoughts and their attitudes and their actions and their very life, what if these people who are influencing them are bat poop crazy? And there are some social influences on the internet and social media that you have to just tell your children, son, he's bat poop crazy. They go, Papa, what does bat poop mean? I say, I'll tell you when you get a little bit older. And by the way, this applies to young white Americans too, doesn't it? Darn right it does. Thoughts lead to attitudes, lead to actions, leads to destiny, to faith. There are two people I think who are social influencers. Watch for falling rocks. Do you remember when this social influencer right here who informs, inspires, and motivates a lot of people said, there are good people on both sides in Charlottesville. Yeah. Mr. What's his name?
Dave Chappelle.
When Dave, a few months ago, did an HBO special, it was so horrendous in the focus he had on LGBTQ people. It wasn't even funny. But he's a social influencer, and everybody just laughed and said, do you know what you just laughed at? This guy here, anybody here for me? You know Lil Wayne, huh? I know you know Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne did a rap a few years ago, the lyric of which compared a sexual act to the death of Emmett Till. And I went in my class to talk about it, and you know what? the sophomores and juniors in college had never heard of Emmett
They
Till.
didn't know Emmett Till.
Which is why Lil Wayne could degrade him and use all kinds of horrific pornographic language and then talk about Emmett Till in the same phrasing. But my students didn't know who Emmett Till was. Somebody stopped teaching them certain things. Just as, for example, did it happen in Athens, Tennessee a few days ago? The school board there voted that you cannot read a book called M-A-U-S. Mouse? Is that what you said? Yeah. The Polish Holocaust. You said, you can't read that. But you can listen to this. You can listen to him call people the B word, the H word. I think it starts with a W if you spell it right. I'm a gangster, I'm a thug, I'm a dog. Now imagine if your 10-year-old kid listens to that until he's 18. It might influence his language. It might influence her thinking. It might influence her attitudes. It might certainly influence her beliefs, and then it will influence her behavior, and then it will determine her destiny. As Grandma would say, you know, 5 minutes of pleasure can be a lifetime of pain. You say to somebody nowadays that look at you like, oh, you're old school, Papa. Those symbols over there on the face, I don't even know what some of them are. But that's who's giving out stuff nowadays. That's what the kids are listening to. And you have to ask yourself, is it relevant? So what is this stuff? I think I've explained. Where do people get it from? How do you acquire? What happens to it? Does it get outmoded? That's old school. So that's who's your granny. A lot of the stuff that we learned in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s that was so elemental to the American character, that ideal America we thought about, has gotten absorbed and just gone away. People aren't even taught certain things anymore. They're not taught because the teachers are not prepared to teach black history. No wonder they don't want to talk. You see? But I tell people all the time, and I don't mean this, watch the falling rocks. I think black history must be for white people. Because black people live black history every day. You have to wait to Groundhog Day. I mean, it's much like, I don't celebrate it with any less reverence. But I am persuaded that people are right who say the observation of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday has amounted to nothing more than a Disneyfication of Martin Luther King. They've turned him into a cartoon figure. They don't even talk about Martin Luther King's radical theology, that Martin Luther King was dead set against the war in Vietnam. That Martin Luther King was saying we need to have guaranteed income for people, and people need to have certain living wages, and people need to have a certain type of health care. The very issues we're arguing right now in the Build America Back bill that they turned down, not to mention the voting stuff. Well, Martin Luther King had talked about that when I was 19 years old. So where does stuff go? There's America, lots of different kinds of people, and you can bet all of these different Ethiopian, Canadian, Nigerian, Filipino, Mexican, Canadians, Vietnamese, Indians, Cubans, Guatemalans, Puerto Ricans, that now, where's Virginia on here? Virginia's most common county of birth for foreign-born people is India and El Salvador. Because I'm sure you can tell when you go to the medical facilities in East Tennessee, there's a preponderance of people who have Asian backgrounds. Before my father died, Dad said, "But it ain't an American doctor in this hospital no more." Yeah, he was saying that. And I don't think they got the best training like they get. I don't know where they're getting some of these fellows from. He's treating me for this. And Dad was right. You know, because we noticed a few years ago that behind the explosion of Oxycontin and methamphetamine addiction in southern Appalachia was the medical profession.
That's right.
You know, people who could move drugs. And a lot of them had their ties back in Asian countries. This is documented in several articles we can see. So I just try to say, for however long I've taken, I'm one of those black folk who has not lost my stuff. And recently I knew I'd done something well, because my 14-year-old, I was at his high school. He goes to high school in Houston with 4,800 kids. It's a big school. And he walks away from his buddy and he said, "Hey man, I'll see you tomorrow. God willing, the creek don't rise." I said, he's been listening to the old man. Because his friend had no idea where God willing, the creek don't rise. Yeah, so don't lose that stuff. That's why I like to come to East Tennessee in the fall. I used to go to the Museum of Appalachia down around Norris, Tennessee, where they have the museum. Anybody ever been to the Museum of Appalachia? It's 75 miles, not 75, 25 miles north of Knoxville, up around Clinton. And you go to these festivals throughout Tennessee in the fall. And you know what these festivals are? It is a retention of White Mountain stuff. It's somebody playing a banjo and a mandolin and a mule, making some sorghum around the circle, and some people selling some blueberry jam they made off the farm. And you try to pass it on to your grandchildren. And black people have as much a right to pass it on to their grandchildren, and not say, you got to integrate yourself and forget about all of those stuff the colored people used to do. As my father would say, that's a crock. He would, because some of this stuff is absolutely insane. That we have gone so far as to make a case that anybody who wants to improve a black community, anybody who wants to make Mary Street neighborhood a prosperous neighborhood where some people who live in that neighborhood can control the economy of that neighborhood. They can own some of the stores in that neighborhood. When Appalachian Highlands or whatever the new dispensation on the branding of East Tennessee comes about, make sure some black people got some stores and some businesses. That's important. That's important. Otherwise, your grandchildren will be in the same predicament you're in. Now it's time to say goodbye to all our company. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it. That's the motto of Berea College. God has made us one blood, all nations of people. Yeah. And as y'all know, I think it was 1963, Martin Luther King literally wrote an open letter from a Birmingham jail to what he called the white clergymen of the South. And he said, brothers, y'all supposed to be in this jail with me. And now here we are 60 years later. And part of the most recalcitrant community in America are evangelical Christians. And by the way, they're beating each other up too. The Southern Baptists, the churches and the tablets. Why? Over some of these very questions that we were dealing with when I was born and when some of you all were born 50 and 60 and 70 years ago. And just as we have been able to put ourselves in this predicament, I don't think we have any other option but how to figure out how to get ourselves out of it. So once again, thank y'all very much. If anybody has any questions, Martin, is that where you want to see?
You want to take a few questions at the front?
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as it's an easy one, you throw me like a basketball, all right? No curves allowed, no fastballs. But I'd be happy to entertain any question. Yes, sir.
What would you suggest is the best biography?
We just started over again. I hate my hearing aids, and I've deliberately left them in Houston.
What would you suggest as far as the best biography of Martin Luther King?
Whoa. What would you suggest as the best biography of Martin Luther King? Sir, I'm one of those teachers who doesn't mind saying, I'm going to go home and look at a couple of things, and I want to email you. You email me. But there's so much on Dr. King. I'm sorry, but I'm blanking on it. It's a gentleman who's at Stanford University, where they hold all of the Martin Luther King papers. And he wrote a fascinating book on King. It might be 20 years old. But I'll email it to you as soon as you get in touch with me. Even if it's tonight, no problem, I'll get right back with you. Any other questions? Where's my water? Yes, sir. Reverend Ward, is it?
Yes, sir.
William Ward?
Yes, sir.
So I met this brother last night.
Awesome presentation. If you had if you had to write a book to your grandsons,
If I had to write a
if you
book
had to write a
about
book to your grandsons,
uh-huh.
and this was the last thing you had to say to them, what information, what stuff would you put in your book?
Well, if you'll allow me to be flippant for a moment, that question was asked of Frederick Douglass, who is an intellectual hero of mine. And they said, if you had 3 last words, what would they be? And he said, agitate, agitate, agitate. You know, no woman ever made any history not agitating, right? America would be stuck in its past if people had not agitated, you know, back during the Civil Rights Movement. Even this morning, I went so far as to say about Mr. Howe, is that the teacher's name in Kingsport? Horn. I remembered that prayer, maybe it wasn't a prayer, rather, it was an apology from a Polish Lutheran minister, right? Preston, and he had some lines that said, they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up. Then they came for the socialists. You know, they're calling any Democrat as a socialist. They came for the socialists, and I didn't speak up. They came for the, you know, there's a whole list of whom they came for. And finally they said, and then they came for me. And there was nobody left to speak up. So that's what I'm trying to say to my children, because my grandchildren too. And that is some of the same things that my grandparents, and I did get to meet one of my grandparents, my grandmother closest to our home, one grandmother lived in Coburn, but they both lived to be 104. And I got to spend a lot of time around them. And so I have noticed in our DNA, in terms of those women particularly, who didn't take no stuff, and they taught us, you stand up for yourself. You know, people might have a better car, people might have a better this, but they're not better than you. And so, you know, I find myself telling my grandsons in a different way some of the same things my granddaddy told me. For example, to use a wretched racial epithet that black people directed at white people, it was peckerwood. Anybody ever heard the term peckerwood? Some of y'all. Yeah, I know. So there was a town over near Wattsburg, Kentucky, pronounced Wattsburg, not Whitesburg, but Wattsburg. Over near Wattsburg is a town called Leatherwood. Leatherwood, Kentucky. It's in Leslie County, and Papa would say, now get it. Don't you be caught dead by them peckerwoods in Leatherwood. They were called sundown towns. Parts of the county where you should not be caught after dark. I'll bet you there were some sundown towns in East Tennessee. You in Tennessee had some big sundowns. You catch you sundown down there, they're hanging. Preston Mitchell back here, would you stand up for a minute, sir? I want to introduce y'all to a Lutheran deacon, Episcopal. Lord, I mean you're a Lutheran. Come over here, let me baptize you, brother. But Preston has been doing some fascinating work as a historian retired from UVA-Wise, getting markers around the state of Virginia, particularly in southwest Virginia, marking the spots where African Americans were hung. And they are also cleaning up black graveyards. The other day when I was headed here from Abingdon, I think, I cut through Coburn, where my grandparents and uncles and aunts, my daddy's siblings are all buried. And I was just happy that the graveyard is kept really clean. Because we still got some cousins over there that everybody sends $50 every now and then. Say, Butch, go clean up the graveyard. But the point is, that's part of our material stuff. There might be some graveyards in Bristol that people might say, we ought to make that look a little better. A number of things like that. So just what I would say to my grandson then and my granddaughters, I have 2 granddaughters and 2 grandsons that range from 14 to 21. We're trying to tell them to get involved in something. You're 14 years old. But you know, the social justice movement nowadays seems to revolve around incidents of violence that involve policemen. That's what everybody gets all. But there are things that need to be done systematically every day through the efforts like the NAACP, church organizations. You know, let's don't wait till the next George Floyd catastrophe before we hold meetings in the community of people of good faith and good intention to break down some of these barriers that can only be broken down between 2 individuals. You know, it has nothing to do with you as a white female and all other black females, but you and Ms. McDaniels behind you. You know, so we try to tell our children, get to know people. They live in Houston, Texas. It's the most diverse city in the world. In the whole wide world, it's Houston. I tell my grandson, you better let Papa pay for you to take a Spanish tutorial. He said, Papa, I take Spanish at school. They don't teach you good enough at school. I'm going to pay $80 a week for this lady to teach you some Spanish because you're going to live in Houston, Texas, and 64% of people in Houston, Texas are named Lupita and Jose. And as they'll tell you, this is Mexico, don't you tell me go back home for. This was Mexico until you stole it fair and square. I'm telling you, I live in Texas. It's an unreal world sometimes because people, we're all being taught in modern politics, the words we're using, we're taught that y'all's black neighbors want to take y'all's stuff. Yeah. That this black guy you don't know wants to take your job. They have us thinking we're at war with each other. It's almost like, if you think, what's it say, so a woman thinketh, so is she. So if you think enough of this dystopian world, you will act negatively. Somebody asked me last night, said, you're 75 and you're so energetic and you're so optimistic. I said, my grandmama lived to be 104 and she was a very optimistic person. She said, well, Billy, what good is it going to do you run around and act like you mad at people all the time? And so you see a lot of young African Americans, and I'm not just beating y'all up, don't get me wrong, because I know the plans of white youth also, but I see a lot of young African Americans who seem to be more depressed than a young person should be. Because certainly they got more stuff than we ever had. Absolutely. And they ain't happy at all. You know, and we were happy with a June bug on a piece of thread. Remember that? We were happy with that. And now you have kids who have virtually everything, but what does it gain the person to have everything and lose their stuff? I'm sorry, souls. Maybe while watching me and thee while we have someone from another. You have a question, ma'am? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were saying I have a question.
Is it Cleveland Carson?
Cleveland County, Tennessee?
Cleveland Carson, the author at Stanford. Cleveland Carson, the CD Stanford.
Oh, thank you, my man. Cleveland Carson at Stanford. Yeah, that's great work on Dr. King. Thank you so much. Yeah. When I was younger, I could remember stuff. Yes, sir. You look like you're a reporter or something.
Well,
Are you?
I learned from the best.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
Well, I want to thank you. I emailed back and forth with you about a research paper I was doing.
What is your name?
Benson Redmond. It's been about a year or so.
You're a bow tie guy.
I am, yes, sir.
Yes, I'm a bow tie guy.
So I was directed to Dr. Creative Brown's book, Gone Home, reading those interviews, starting with the introduction of your book. And I noticed the stories all revolve around the Lynch Colored School and the impact that those teachers had. And you've already mentioned that. What was the stuff that was imparted by those teachers at the Lynch Colored School that that still that you hold on to?
Let me see. Well, I think I made some aside to our high school principal. Those of you, for example, who are beyond a certain age, that you might have gone to Langston High School in Johnson City. What was your Bristol, Slater?
Douglas.
So not Douglas?
Douglas.
So if you went to schools like that, you know that the black principal was the epitome of dignity, decorum, character, and our high school principal, like every black high school principal in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, people like Charles S. Johnson, those men constantly wore shirts and ties. Our high school principal would be out cutting his grass with a tie on, because Mr. Coleman knew and they would look at you almost and say, "You are credit to your race, Billy." You say, "Oh, I am." Because in a sense, back in those days, you carried that flag I had early on, you carried the race on your back. Because Grandma would almost say, not only you a Turner, what you do reflects on all of us. And you know, you young people won't believe this, but recently something heinous happened, one of those murder type situations. And my wife, who was raised in Concord, North Carolina, the stuff is so deeply ingrained in her, the way we were socialized. The first thing she said when the news finished its flash, she says, "I hope they wasn't colored." I said, "Vivian, you sound like my grandmother." Because Granny would say, "Was it colored?" Right, brother? Yeah, was it colored? Because we knew that, well, I ain't got to explain that to nobody. Yes, that was the kind of things those teachers taught us. And as all of you all know, I'm sure there's several teachers in here, is that nobody knows just how far the impact of a teacher goes, some wise person once said. Because the next thing you know, they'll pass it on and they'll go like that. I tell a story about one of my teachers, a white male that was up there named John Stevenson, who was the president of Berea College for 10 years. He taught me at the University of Kentucky. When I was 20, I wrote a paper looking at the contrast in the philosophical position of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I was ahead of the game. Smith Corona typewriter. No MacBook. Typed up, gave John my 9-page paper. Weeks or so later, John walks through the class and hands out these papers. Because I had teachers like that back at the Lynch Colored School. And they actually read your paper and put red marks on. And on the back of that paper, here's the impact of a teacher like the ones I had. John had written on my paper, "Dear Bill, I am so glad you completed this paper because we have run out of coverings on the bottom of our bird cage." He really got my attention. Over the 45 years that I taught college, I must have put that on 5,000 students. In fact, I did it one time, and this lady called me, "Dr. Turner, this is Mrs. So-and-so and so-and-so from Birmingham, and you have my daughter there at Fisk in your class." "Yes, ma'am, I know Winona." "Well, this paper has my daughter severely depressed. You wrote that you wanted your bird to poop on the paper." It was John's line. It worked perfectly. And you know, we had teachers like that at Slater and like that. Because you know, there was a time that the only thing a black woman could do professionally was to be a secretary or a teacher. My wife, for example, was a senior at Livingstone College in Concord, North Carolina, AMBC school, right, brother?
Yes, sir.
And Vivian was passing through the career day thing on her way to teach. She was a math major in education. She was on her way to do her student teaching in April of 1968, and this recruiter from a company called Big Blue, as in IBM, saw a math book in her hand and said, "May I speak to you for a moment?" And my wife walked over and said, "You're a math major?" She said, "Yes. We'd like to offer you a job at IBM in Lexington, Kentucky." and we're going to make you a systems engineer. That's when they were teaching Fortran and Cobalt to code computers, and everything was on some 80-digit cards. You know, cards you carry your dissertation around. So Vivian ends up going a route that has been going ever since. Vivian was going to be another Miss Sweat in a black high school somewhere in North Carolina. But she ended up becoming a systems engineer for IBM, and the next thing you know, she was helping in the development of nuclear weapons at the Lawrence Livermore Labs at Berkeley. Well, I'm just saying, things changed. And so many black women who would have been a teacher became like the ladies in that movie that sent those people to the moon, Hidden Figures. There were a lot of hidden figures in this era, folks. And so my wife ended up in computer science, you know, by virtue of coming through a Rosenwald school. Did they have Rosenwald schools around here? I bet they did. Coming to a Rosenwald school in little old Concord, North Carolina, and her mama worked for Cannon Mills. You know Kannapolis, where number 3's from, or Vale's from. You know Dale Earnhardt, don't you? Yeah. Yeah, and so she grew up in a cotton town. I grew up in a coal town. And let me tell you, those teachers must have been really affected, because I was the first in my family to go to college, and I love to tell this story. Recently, one of our relatives died. We all met down at our home in Kentucky. But this time, I'm the oldest in the family, because my oldest sister died, my oldest brother died. I'm the oldest male in the family, 4 other brothers. And so there we were, and a number of people, about as big as right here, about 35 people, were my nieces and my nephews. And one of them got a BA from Stanford and an MBA from Columbia. Justin, my brother's kid. One of my brothers has 3 daughters who graduated from Hampton. That's pretty tall cotton, be from Harlan County, Kentucky, we think. And as Mama says about the wife of my brother, now she's a real doctor. She is an oncologist. And I go, Ma, anthropology? Ma, they want to hear that stuff. That's soft science. So you see, these teachers, these colored teachers that came out of Hampton and Virginia Union and Virginia State and just up and down the line, I think there's 107 such colleges. Did you notice that last week, 18 of them had firebomb threats? Yeah, 18. In Houston, every black college in metropolitan Houston, there's about 4, they were all threatened with bombs. The FBI says they found them the other day. So we have some very endemic hatred going on somewhere around here, and it's getting more and more scary because there was a time when I was coming along when you knew who was who. You knew where you shouldn't go.
That's right.
And now that you don't know where you shouldn't go, you know, some strange things happen. I mean, it's a cheap phrase, but that's what it is. Okay, any more questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you. I'm so glad I'm here. I'm Angela. We've been emailing each other. We're going at the VA, talking about you speaking.
Oh, okay.
One of my favorite chapters was about the integration. And my question is, during that time, because y'all read about, the pictures were thrown away, trophies, different things was gone. How did you all not lose your stuff as you all transitioned into the integrated?
Oh, well, I think Mrs. McDaniels last night mentioned an effort around here for, what school was this? Was it Slater maybe?
Well, not all of the, but some of the artifacts are at the Slater School, so they're in a display case. And then Douglas, the items are at the Bristol, Virginia School Board. So there is a concern about, we have caretakers who are, looking after some of those items, but what happens to that stuff? And how do we make sure that it's preserved? So that is a concern that I have as well. How do we make sure that those items are preserved so that we can share those with generations to come? So that is definitely a concern.
Yeah, when they closed the school that my mother went to, and all my brothers and sisters, up to the period they integrated in 1963, my senior year, and none of the material culture of that school was kept. They threw it away. I mentioned it several times in my book, because we had one of the best athletic teams that used to come over here and stomp Douglas and slave. Yeah, they came from these coal camps because a lot of times guys are working the mine all week and they play football Friday nights. 28 years old. You know? But that happened a lot in the mountains. I'm telling you, they played baseball because they had rivalries as to who has the best teams. You know, they had semi-pro teams that were. So a lot of our stuff, most of it, for example, there was elegant photographs in the hallway, a long corridor. When you came into the front door of the school, on either side, you would see George Washington Carver, you would see Mary McLeod Bethune, you would see Paul Laurence Dunbar, W.E.B. Du Bois, Ralph Bunche, Leontine Price, on down the line, every day. And so these images were burned into your head. Then they integrated this, and in our library at the Lynch Color School were all these photographs of iconic achievers. You know, back to these people loved, I mean, Jackie Robinson was picked because they knew this guy has a bachelor's degree from UCLA. There were a lot of black baseball players, much better than Jackie Robinson, much better. Josh Gibson, some of those guys. But Jackie Robinson had a college degree and could speak French. So what was he? He was a representative of his race. And Pee Wee Reese and them knew he's a lot smarter than us, but he can also play baseball like that. But these kind of situations, those kind of heroes, those kind of sheroes, those people, they're probably putting out more on some of these streaming channels. I mean, they have some stuff on television. I said, Lord, I can't keep up with all this stuff because I'm pretty oriented to reading. I like to read. But there are a lot of good things that are coming on television that try to tell the story real good. But I'm also afraid that a number of the creative types who are writing Hollywood scripts that supposedly depict black life and culture, if you'll excuse me, my grandmother would say, that girl didn't nurse well at the breast of black culture. Because that didn't make no sense right there. Some of the stuff they have on the television, you say, who wrote that? What are they presenting to us? They're telling the world that this is representative, and they don't tell the world that this is creativity. So, yeah, a lot of the stuff and a lot of the people that you see on television nowadays, I would just go so far once again as to say, everybody that's skin folks ain't kin folks. Yeah, because they're more oriented to another world that is so disparate from grandma's world. They don't even talk like grandma. You know, where did that child grow up at? I mean, you've seen them. You know, I'm just making a broad, sweeping critique, which is what you do when you're a sociologist. But the fact of the matter is, certain things that are represented in the media as being representative of black culture ain't no more black culture than something that is presented as Appalachian culture. It's a caricature. Right. It's a made-up reality. Right. And so people come away with the wrong impressions because, you know, I mean, you guys have seen these films that they have done on the South, particularly that one called Deliverance, 30, 40 years ago. It made people look like savages. And in some instances, some of the things I see nowadays are pretty heavy into if it bleeds, it leads. Isn't that what they say in the news industry? You know, the first story is breaking news, a car wreck or something. But just everything, everyday things that people do to try to take care of their families and raise their children with a sense of decency, those shows aren't very popular. You know, I'm just a talking. Any more questions? Martin? His name is Martin. You know what that means, don't you?
I appreciate that. I thought you were going to clap for him, but week about African Americans in Appalachia, because it's a learning experience, and it puts us in touch with a culture that has been largely invisible to the outside world and inaudible, and yet we discover that the voice of that culture speaks with prophetic urgency, not just here, but throughout our world. This is a world that needs the stuff that we've just heard about tonight. And it's a joy to have had Bill tonight. It's a joy to have each of you here with us tonight. Thank you for coming out. Thank you especially to Central Presbyterian Church, to Ann and her very kind session, as well as our sound folks and video folks in the back. We really appreciate your help tonight. Be sure to get our bookmark. Go get back and take a picture of the QR code for Bill's book. Come say hello, and thank you for being with us tonight. Please join me once again in thanking Bill Turner.